I never thought I'd be the kind of person who held on to the past like a security blanket, but my childhood home was more than just wood and paint. It was my foundation. My name is Anya, and at 27, I was building a quiet life for myself in the city. Small apartment, a marketing job I was good at, and a Friday night routine that involved herbal tea, fuzzy socks, and scrolling through old photos on my phone like they were ancient treasures. But every memory seemed to orbit one place, that house. The one my parents raised me in. The one with the creaky floorboards and the backyard where my dad taught me how to ride a bike. The one where mom would hum old Hindi songs while kneading dough on Sunday mornings. That house wasn't just a structure. It was a living, breathing archive of my existence. It smelled like sandalwood incense and turmeric and carried the sound of our laughter, our fights, and the silences in between. I hadn't lived there in nearly 5 years, but I visited often. I'd sit on the front steps with a cup of chai, letting the wind whisper to me through the neem tree branches. That place grounded me. It reminded me who I was before life got loud and complicated. My relationship with my parents was complicated. Not broken, not perfect. They loved me, I didn't doubt that, but we had our distances. Especially after I moved out. They didn't like that I'd chosen a career over marriage. They didn't understand why I insisted on independence. And I didn't understand why they couldn't see that I was still their daughter, even if I didn't follow the rulebook. We spoke every week. Short, polite calls. Updates about the weather, work, and which Ani's son got engaged this time. But beneath the surface, there was this lingering sense that something wasn't quite right. Little things. My dad sounding distracted. My mom brushing off conversations about my next visit. And once, when I asked if I could stop by the house that weekend, my mom paused, just long enough to feel off, before saying they'd be out of town for a few days. It was unlike her. She always lit up at the idea of me coming home. That pause stayed with me. Still, I didn't think too much of it. Life was busy. Deadlines. Rent. The occasional loneliness that I tried to hush with Spotify playlists and scented candles. I told myself I'd go back soon. Maybe even take some time off to finally repaint my old room, the one with glow-in-the-dark stars still stuck to the ceiling. But life, as it often does, had other plans. One evening, I was scrolling through social media when I saw a post from an old school friend. It was a selfie in front of my house. Except it wasn't my house anymore. The white gate had been repainted black. The bougainvillea vines were gone. The swing set had been removed. The caption said, "Can't believe this gem was on the market. So lucky to have snagged our dream starter home." My blood turned to ice. My thumb hovered above the screen like it didn't know what to do. I read the caption again. And again. Was on the market. Snagged. Dream starter home. No. No, this couldn't be real. I called my mother. Straight to voicemail. I called again. Still voicemail. Then I called my father. He picked up on the second ring, and his voice had that familiar mix of calm and irritation. "Hello." "Baba," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Did you sell the house?" A pause. A breath. And then, just like that, the silence told me everything I needed to know. "We did, beta," he said finally. It was time. The maintenance was getting too much, and it made sense. Made sense to who? I snapped, tears already forming in my eyes. To you? Without even telling me? Without even asking if I wanted to be part of that decision? There was more silence. That kind of silence that feels like an earthquake waiting to rupture. "You weren't living here anymore," he said. "You have your own life now. We didn't think it would matter." Didn't think it would matter. I hung up, not because I wanted to end the conversation, but because I couldn't breathe. I was sitting on my apartment floor, staring at that damn Instagram post, wondering how my own parents could erase a part of me without even blinking. I didn't sleep that night. I sat there, cross-legged on the floor, flipping through photo albums. My 6th birthday party on the lawn. Mom braiding my hair by the window. Me standing on tiptoes to stick that first glow-in-the-dark star to my ceiling. And just like that, it was all gone. The next day, I called in sick to work. I needed to go back. Not for closure. Not for peace. I didn't even know why. I just needed to stand in front of that house, my house, one last time. When I reached the neighborhood, it was almost unrecognizable. New paint, new fences, a for sale sign already replaced by a welcome home one. And on the porch, a couple stood holding hands, giggling over a coffee mug. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. I just stood there, heart heavy, lungs tight, staring at the place that held my entire childhood like it was some kind of disposable relic. And that's when I knew I wasn't going to just walk away. I didn't know what I was going to do yet, but they had taken something sacred from me. My parents had made a decision that cut into my very soul. They didn't even have the decency to warn me. But I had time. I had resilience. And, most importantly, I had a surprise of my own. 2 days passed, and I still hadn't heard from my parents. No apology. No explanation. Not even a text. They had vanished into the silence of their choice, pretending as if selling the home I grew up in was some mundane act, like donating old clothes or tossing out expired groceries. The betrayal sat like a stone in my chest, but what hurt more than the house being gone was being treated like I didn't matter. Like my memories didn't matter. But what they didn't know was that they hadn't just sold a building. They had sold something I wasn't ready to let go of, and I wasn't going to let them walk away from that without understanding what they had truly done. I started digging. First, I looked up public property records, something I'd never imagined myself doing, but grief has a strange way of turning you into someone else. I found the deed transfer date. It had been signed nearly 6 weeks ago. That meant they had kept it from me long before the house was even officially sold. My own parents had made plans, listed the home, showed it to strangers, signed the papers, and never said a word. The betrayal burned hotter. I looked up the buyers, names I didn't recognize. A young couple in their early 30s, just married. I found them on social media easily enough. Their feed was filled with smiling photos and captions about starting a new chapter and finally making a home together. But that was my chapter. My home. Still, I wasn't angry at them. They didn't know. They were just excited and innocent, unaware that the house they'd fallen in love with already had a ghost living in every wall, and that ghost was me. Then came the real twist. I found something in one of the photos they had posted. In the background, barely visible, was the old garage. The door was open slightly, and peeking out from the side of it was a corner of the trunk. A wooden trunk I remembered vividly because I had carved a little moon into it with a compass in 8th grade. It had been mine, filled with drawings, love notes, and a small collection of childhood treasures. When I moved out, I had asked my parents to never touch it. Had they forgotten? Or worse, had they left it there? Fueled by a storm of emotion, I decided I needed answers. Not just from my parents, but from the house itself. I reached out to the new owners, sending a carefully worded message that I was the previous resident and would love to see the home once more, if possible, for closure. I didn't expect a reply, but they responded within an hour. They were kind, surprisingly so. Said they'd be happy to give me a short tour if it would help. "We understand what this house must have meant to you," they wrote. "It's clear it was loved." I agreed to come by the next day. As I pulled up to the house, it felt like I was approaching a friend who had betrayed me. It looked familiar and foreign at the same time. The couple greeted me warmly. Their names were Aisha and Kanal, and they welcomed me in like I was an old friend. The living room had new curtains. The kitchen had new tiles. My room was painted a soft gray. But despite the changes, the soul of the house still pulsed beneath the surface. Then, as we chatted, I carefully steered the conversation toward the garage. "Oh, that place," Aisha laughed. "We haven't really gone through it yet. There was some old trunk in there. It looks vintage, but it's heavy as hell." My heart pounded. "Would you mind if I took a look?" I asked gently. "Not at all," Kanal said. "It's yours, technically. We figured someone left it behind by accident." They led me to the garage. The second I saw the trunk, everything came flooding back. I ran my hand over the surface. The moon carving was still there, faint but real. I opened it slowly, half expecting dust to fly up into my face like in the movies. But it was all there. My childhood sketchbook. The letter I wrote to myself when I was 16. A small plastic tiara from a birthday party. My grandfather's watch. The old tape recorder with my first voice memo. My soul in fragments. I swallowed hard. They watched me quietly, respectfully. I turned and gave them a small smile. "Thank you," I said. "You have no idea what this means to me." They nodded, and after a brief goodbye, I left, trunk in tow. That night, I sat with it in my apartment, reading, listening, remembering. And that's when I knew what I had to do. I wasn't going to let my parents sweep this under the rug. They thought they could erase my childhood with a transaction, as if my life's foundation was just real estate to be leveraged for comfort. But I had a piece of it now. A piece they forgot. And more than that, I had a plan. I started drafting a letter. Not a rage-filled rant, but a carefully crafted message that hit where it hurt. Emotion and legacy. I reminded them of the memories we'd made, of the promises we spoke, of the nights we spent in that house during blackouts, playing Antakshari under candlelight. I told them that selling the house wasn't just about walls and furniture, it was about erasing me from the narrative of our family without even giving me the chance to say goodbye. And then, at the end, I told them the part they didn't know. That the trunk was still in the garage. That I had seen the house. That strangers had been kinder to me in my grief than my own parents. And finally, I told them, "You may have sold the house, but I still have its soul. And you'll see exactly what I mean soon." What I planned next wasn't revenge. It was revelation. Because if they could bury my past without remorse, then they deserved to feel the weight of what they tried to forget. The letter had been sent. No reply. No acknowledgement. And in some small, bitter way, I expected that. My parents had been closing emotional doors long before they closed the front one of that house. But what they hadn't realized, what they never could have anticipated, was that their silence had lit a fire inside me. A calm, quiet fire that wasn't about revenge or anger anymore. It was about truth. It was about presence. And it was about reclaiming a voice they had tried to mute by excluding me from one of the biggest decisions of our shared life. So I made a decision. I would host an exhibit. A one-night gallery. Not in a fancy space. Just a rented hall. I'd title it, "The House That Raised Me." A tribute to memory, loss, and legacy. The trunk would be the centerpiece. Around it, I'd recreate parts of the house from memory. The dining table set with mismatched plates. My bedroom corner with my sketches. I'd frame pages from my childhood journals, print photographs of old family dinners, and even display the tape recorder looping voice notes from my younger self. Raw. Real. Unfiltered. And at the heart of it all, on a stand under a glass dome, would be the letter I had sent to my parents. Open for everyone to read. I sent out invitations to friends, neighbors from the old block, and even Aisha and Kanal. But most importantly, I mailed an invite, handwritten to my parents. No threats. No expectations. Just a date, a time, and the words, "If you want to remember what home truly was, you'll come." The days leading up to the event were a whirlwind of preparation. I borrowed props, collected audio clips, and even reached out to a local journalist I knew from college who is now running a small arts and culture blog. She loved the concept. "Stories like these matter," she said over the phone. "People forget homes aren't just structures. They're witnesses." Her blog post was titled, "One Woman's Emotional Tribute to the Home Her Parents Sold Without Saying Goodbye." It spread. More than I expected. Suddenly, I had people messaging me, some I didn't know, sharing how their childhood homes were ripped away during divorces, foreclosures, or silent family feuds. They told me how they still dreamt of rooms that no longer existed, of windows that once framed the sun like gold. The night of the exhibit arrived. I stood near the entrance of the rented hall, heart pounding like a drum. The space was dimly lit, filled with soft, golden lights and the sound of faint laughter and whispered conversations. Every item in that room was a memory externalized, a piece of my past made visible. And then, people came. Dozens. Maybe over 100. Strangers, friends, neighbors from the old street, some I hadn't seen in over a decade. Even my old 6th grade teacher showed up, tears in her eyes as she gazed at my journal pages. And still no sign of my parents. I try not to check the door too often. Tried to stay in the moment. I gave a small speech, explaining how it wasn't about shaming anyone, it was about reminding people that memories matter. That when you erase someone's place in a home, you erase a part of their identity. I could see people resonating. Some cried. Others smiled knowingly. Many hugged me tightly, thanking me for giving a voice to something they'd buried for years. And then, nearly halfway through the night, I turned toward the door again and froze. They were there. My mother. My father. Standing just inside the doorway. Not dressed for drama. Just simple, tired, quiet. For a long moment, we just looked at each other. No words. Then, slowly, they walked in. They moved through the exhibit like they were walking through a dream. They paused at the photographs, lingered near the voice recorder, stared long and hard at the trunk. And when they reached the letter in the glass case, I saw my mother's hand tremble. My father's face, stoic and unreadable for years, shifted. He looked like someone realizing a crime too late. I didn't approach them. I let them take it in. And when they turned to leave, they both stopped beside me. My mother looked me in the eyes, her voice barely above a whisper. We didn't know how much it still meant to you. I held her gaze. You didn't ask. She looked down. My father added quietly. We thought, maybe you'd outgrown it, that you didn't care anymore. I exhaled. Slowly. That was the mistake. You assumed silence meant indifference. There was so much more to say. So many decades of emotion wrapped up in a single night. But we were standing in a gallery of ghosts. And sometimes, ghosts speak for you. They left without making a scene. But I knew something had shifted. They had seen what I carried. What they had left behind. After the crowd thinned and the lights dimmed, I stood alone beside the trunk. I opened it one last time that night, reached in, and pulled out the tiara. Placed it gently on my head, and laughed through a tear. Not because it was funny, but because I had finally taken back my story. Not through confrontation. Through creation. Not by burning bridges, but by building a lighthouse. 2 weeks after the gallery night, I received a letter. Not an email, not a text, an actual letter. The handwriting on the envelope was familiar, elegant, precise, unmistakably my mother's. I sat with it in my lap for nearly 10 minutes, heart pounding like it had something to prove. I didn't open it right away. Instead, I walked over to the same trunk that had started it all and placed the letter on top of it, as if waiting for the house itself to give me permission. Then I broke the seal. Inside, it wasn't just a letter. It was a confession. My mother's words weren't filled with excuses. They were filled with revelations. Paragraph by paragraph, she peeled back layers I didn't know existed. She wrote about the house, the way it began to feel haunted after I left for college, how the silence became too loud, how my father couldn't walk past my room without pausing. We didn't sell it to hurt you, she wrote. We sold it to stop hurting ourselves. She admitted they hadn't known how to include me in the process, that they feared I'd take it as rejection. Ironically, in trying to avoid pain, they caused the very fracture they had feared. But it was the last page that turned everything. She told me there had been a buyer, someone who came in with cash, ready to tear the house down. A developer who wanted to build 3 townhouses where my memories once stood. My parents were days from finalizing it. And then something happened. Someone else made an offer. All cash. No questions. No remodeling. The buyer promised to preserve everything. To keep the floors, the walls, the windows. Even the lilac tree in the backyard. Said it was for sentimental reasons. They accepted. But they never met the buyer in person. It was handled entirely through a lawyer. I felt my breath catch in my throat. That wasn't coincidence. That was intentional. I picked up my phone and called Aisha. She answered on the first ring. You knew, I said. My voice wasn't angry. It was filled with wonder. You knew, didn't you? She was silent for a beat. Then, I might have made a few calls. Tears spilled before I could stop them. She went on to explain that after the exhibit, she told Kunal everything. About the house. The gallery. My heartbreak. She didn't give him my letter, but she told him the spirit of it.
And he acted.
He bought it. Quietly. In my name. I sat down, too overwhelmed to stand. My childhood home wasn't gone. It wasn't leveled. It was waiting for me. That weekend I drove out to the house, now mine. As I stepped onto the front porch, my hands trembled against the old railing. The door still creaked the same way when I pushed it open. The scent inside was different, fresher, but the soul was the same. The wooden floors echoed beneath my feet, whispering hellos like old friends. I walked from room to room, touching the walls, whispering memories. And then I reached the backyard. There it was. The lilac tree.
Taller now.
Older. Still rooted. Just like me. I stood beneath it, letting the sunlight spill over my face, and then I saw something tucked into one of its low branches. A ribbon. Pale blue. My ribbon. From my 10th birthday. I had tied it there all those years ago after making a wish. I untied it slowly. Wish granted. The next few weeks passed like a dream. I started planning a restoration project. Not to modernize, but to preserve. I didn't want granite counters or steel accents. I wanted the old wallpaper. The squeaky stair. The uneven windows. I hired a small team, friends of friends, people who understood what it meant to respect the spirit of a space. And through it all, I documented the process. Not for content. For closure. Then one morning, as I was repainting the baseboards in what had once been my room, I heard a knock at the door. It was my father. Alone. In his hand, he held a photograph. It was of me, age 6, asleep on the living room couch, mouth open, crayon still in hand. I found this in the attic, he said. I stepped aside. He entered quietly, reverently, like someone entering a sacred temple. He didn't speak much, just looked around, touched the walls, nodded to himself. Finally, as we stood in the kitchen, he turned to me.
We were wrong, he said.
To think this house was a weight. It was an anchor. And then, after a pause, you've made it into a lighthouse. I didn't cry. I smiled. For the first time in years, I felt whole. Not because the house was saved, but because I was. The truth had been unearthed. The pain confronted. The story rewritten, not erased. This was my climax. Not a confrontation filled with rage, but a revelation rooted in grace. Because sometimes, the most powerful endings don't come with shouting or slamming doors. They come in the form of a quiet return, a gentle knock, and the courage to open that door again. Months passed, and the house transformed gently, lovingly, into a sanctuary. It was no longer just a structure of wood and brick. It had become a bridge between who I was, who I had become, and who I was still yet to be. I held a soft reopening in early spring. Nothing grand. Just a small gathering of close friends, neighbors who had watched me grow up, and people who remembered the way my mother used to wave from the garden and how my father would water the lawn every Saturday morning with a mug of coffee in hand. I called it a homewarming, not a housewarming, because this was never just a house. It was a soul. And it was warm again. Aisha brought flowers. Tulips, my favorite. She placed them in the same vase we used to keep in the dining room. Kunal came too. Quietly, respectfully, with a bottle of red wine and a smile that said everything words didn't need to. And my parents? They came hand in hand. It was the first time in years that we were in the same space without tension bleeding at the edges. My mother cried when she saw her old teacups on display. My father lingered at the windows, marveling at how the original glass had been preserved. No one talked about mistakes. No one demanded apologies. Because sometimes, healing doesn't come from rehashing the pain. Sometimes, healing is being willing to show up anyway. Later that evening, after the guests had gone and the last candle had burned halfway down, I sat on the living room floor, surrounded by the soft hush of memory. That's when I opened the last envelope. It was one I had addressed to myself, months earlier, before I even knew I would get the house back. A letter I had written in a moment of heartbreak and tucked away in the very trunk where everything had begun. I read it now, not as the version of me who was grieving, but as someone who had emerged from the storm. The words were raw, desperate, aching with questions. Will I ever feel like I belong again? Will I ever stop aching for something that no longer exists? I smiled through tears. Because the answer was yes. Yes, I belonged again. Not because things had gone back to the way they were, but because I had rebuilt something new from the ashes of what was lost. Yes, the ache had eased. Not because the house returned, but because I finally stopped running from the feelings it carried. And then, with the letter resting in my lap, I looked up and I saw it. The moon. Full, glowing, suspended like a blessing over the lilac tree outside the window. It was the same moon I used to watch from this very room as a child, wondering what the future held. The same moon I cried beneath when I left home. The same moon that saw me return, changed, matured, reclaimed. I walked outside barefoot, and stood under its light. I didn't need to make a wish this time. I was the wish fulfilled. The next morning, I received a call from a local nonprofit. They had seen the gallery feature and wanted to partner with me to create art therapy programs for displaced youth, kids who'd lost their homes or been forced to start over, without warning. They wanted to use the house if I was open to it. I said yes. It felt poetic. A place that once held my childhood would now help others find a safe place to process theirs. The walls would echo not just with memories, but with healing. It felt right. And for the first time in a long, long time, I didn't feel like I was holding on to the past. I was building the future. One brushstroke at a time. One memory at a time. One child's smile at a time. As weeks turned to seasons, the house evolved into more than a home. It became a haven. An open door. A creative heart. My parents visited often. Sometimes just to drop off a pie or prune the lilac tree. There was no need for long conversations or emotional breakdowns. The love was in the doing, in the shared silence, in the quiet agreement that we were learning how to be a family again, imperfectly but honestly. Kunal and I grew closer too, not because of nostalgia or the past, but because of who we had become now. We were different people, wiser, more patient, more present. He never pushed. He just showed up. Until one evening, we sat under the lilac tree, wine glasses in hand, laughter dancing between us. He looked at me and said, "You know, you didn't just get the house back." I raised an eyebrow. "No. You got yourself back." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. He was right. And as the breeze rustled the branches above us, carrying the scent of new blossoms and old dreams, I closed my eyes and breathed it all in. The past. The pain. The healing. The love. I had made peace with every version of myself that had ever stood on this soil. And now I was home. Truly. Completely. Unapologetically. Home.